Hi, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat. I am Rick Zanotti, and here we are. We had a couple of Skype issues this morning, as sometimes happens. Can't control that, and then we had a stream issue. But we are live and running, and if you're watching the recording, you probably won't know any of this happened. But here
Which
we
is
go.
why we told you.
That's right. Next to me over here is Kirsten Rook. Hey, Kirsten, how are you?
Good, how are you?
And if you're wondering how Kirsten got into this particular show, Dawn is traveling. She is on the road for work. And Lisa Goldstein, who was subbing for Dawn, got stuck in a meeting she could not get out of. And we understand work comes first. But fortunately, Kirsten just happened to be driving home right when I called her, and she jumped right in.
Yes.
Thank you, Kirsten. We appreciate it.
And this is a good one because I'm excited about the topic.
It's a great topic, and we've got a great guest today. We've got Bryan Austin from Game On Learning, and I think we're going to have fun with Bryan. Hey, Bryan, how are you today?
Doing well, and I think I have the most fashionable headphones of any of the three of us on this thing, but hopefully they'll at least provide good audio quality for the broadcast.
They're quite stylish. I like it. It looks good. So gamification. This is exciting.
Indeed. And I'm going to follow you guys' lead. So where would you like to go with gamification, serious games, simulations, etc.?
Well, Kirsten just went through a whole gamification course, so she's got the most background in this. I've played 1 million games, but we haven't done that much in e-learning, and that's something we'd love to talk a little bit about. Some of the I would call erroneous concepts around gamification, where people are creating 50, 100 questions and calling it a game. We call it torture. But what's going on with gamification right now?
Well, I think there is a lot of interest in gamification within the learning and development community based on, kind of an increasing degree of concern about learner engagement with more traditional e-learning. Both I and all of my colleagues within Game On Learning have grown up in learning and development through the emergence of online learning and e-learning. And for a lot of organizations, it's a fantastic value proposition. Learning at the point of need, where the employees are, reducing or eliminating travel costs, etc. But over the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of the organizations that I've talked to and my colleagues have talked to have begun to express concern about the fact that some of their members of their workforce are beginning to push back and just say, this isn't interesting or it's not engaging. It's kind of like read a screen, click on next, and take a few assessment questions at the end. And at the time, we were all on the vendor side with some of the major providers of e-learning content. So we began as colleagues to research some ways that challenge might be addressed, and we became fascinated with learning gamification. We actually founded Game On Learning a couple of years ago, and that was the main thing that drew us to game-based learning and so forth, was the whole engagement issue. It's been interesting, though, that what we found is that properly designed learning games actually allow us to employ more effective models to anchor knowledge and to build skills that are much more likely to be transferred back into the work environment. So it's been a phenomenally fun area for us. Games are supposed to be fun, and so we certainly try to have fun with that part of the business. But I think that's what's really drawing a lot of organizations in to study this topic at the moment.
Yeah, what I find interesting is one of the core precepts around gamification, as far as I know, and please correct me on this, is humans learn better when they're engaged. Adults don't learn from dull. They really don't. But a lot of people seem to have started gamification with the idea of if we put it on a Jeopardy set and we have it have sound effects, well, that's a game, and that's not. So for the people who don't get it, what is it that makes gamification? What is it that makes it a game?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know to what extent there are a lot of misperceptions about this, but there's certainly a lot of different perceptions about this. Gamification actually evolved around organizations wanting to improve their website experience. So they found that if they made the website more fun, included some simple games, allowed people to earn badges and points and things like this, that they spent more time and became more engaged on their website. A lot of those things are natural to evolve into learning and development. Mm-hmm. So gamification itself is really it's kind of defined as adding game elements to what is often traditionally designed learning. And in our case, we focus almost exclusively on online learning. So folks will take a current course, online course, and they may add characters to it. They may add badges, the ability to get points, leaderboard functions, and so forth. And then that course is then gamified. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean it's a game, back to your point, Kirsten. So what the next step above gamification is game-based learning games. They're often called serious games, yep, or they're called game-based simulations. And in those, it's more of a self-contained game. I think a lot of organizations do start with something like Jeopardy or things along those lines. But what we find is that organizations start adding games like that for the novelty. But if you go too far with adding simple learning activities that are just like Jeopardy games and so forth, that novelty very quickly erodes and disappears, and you're kind of back at that point to where you started. Learning games where they're more of a self-contained activity and a little bit more comprehensive, they actually work really well because not only are they more engaging, but the learner's actually more involved. And part of what they do is they create a very memorable learning context. And as most of us in learning and development know, the notion of learning context and making an experience memorable and making it very, very interactive where the learner is actually highly involved is probably the single most important thing that we can do to increase the retention that we have from learning. So most of us think about online courses we may have taken where we kind of proceed through the stream of learning. We take an assessment at the end, and then we move on with our day and our week and our month at work. And the big question is, 2 weeks later, how much do we really remember? And so, although learning games are a bit more complex to develop, they can be a very, very effective way to increase the retention. And at the end of the day, that's really why we train, to allow people to retain the new knowledge, the new skills, and just as importantly, have the confidence to apply those back on their job.
Question, Rick, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you ever find that when you're explaining the idea of using a game structure with people to help them be part of the learning and pull them in, that you have some people who will react to that because of the word game and them thinking that means that it's not dignified or not adult or not serious? Does that happen?
It does happen. And we basically, have kind of learned from that a little bit ourselves as we talk to organizations about gamification and learning game. We do find, and sometimes it's more at the executive level within an organization. It may not always be within learning and development, who I think are more likely to get the notion or the value. But often just the term game can send up a little bit of a red flag where, folks will say, well, wait a minute, training isn't supposed to be fun. We don't want our employees playing games, that type of thing. So part of what we do when we engage with organizations about developing, a very sound strategy in this area is to really get some sense from them as to how their executive team and others throughout the organization think about that notion of a game. And if it has a negative connotation, then let's just use something else that's going to, at the end result, it's going to be the same. The key is the result. But we could instead use the term, simulation or other things along those lines. So I think that's a great question, and I'll bet a lot of the folks that are watching the broadcast or the replay have thought about that, well, what's going to happen if I go into my organization and start talking about learning games? Are people going to take that seriously if they don't really understand why that could be a good learning strategy?
And basically it comes down to the old premise, with what people perceive as games now. The beatings will continue until morale improves.
There you go. And I think that's really it. I mean, one of the things we understand in learning and development these days is that almost every organization is really suffering from a series of constraints. The amount or the volume of learning that has to be deployed out to the organization is immense, and it never ends. We kind of call it the avalanche or the tidal wave. And so you've got that issue. Certainly budgets in most organizations are not aligned with what's necessary to do a great job of accommodating all of that demand for learning. And then typically there are resource challenges as well. So if you think about the time constraints and the resource constraints and the budget constraints mapped against the volume of demand, what a lot of organizations now are doing is they're struggling to get the bar high enough with the training that they push out to the organization for that training to be effective. And part of what we try and do with organizations is to show them how they can actually substantially raise that bar using various types of learning gamification to not only get a better handle around the demand, but hopefully also increase the engagement factor and the effectiveness of the learning. It's a big challenge, though, and that's something we talk to organizations about every day.
Now, do you find that a lot of people, when they think games, they think of the PlayStation-type games, Xbox-type games, where they're really, really fancy, and then they come across really simple e-learning games and immediately go, oh, that's not quite right. Now, to a point, that's generational, too, but that's one thing that we've heard in the past, that can you make it look like Call of Duty? Yeah, we
sure.
could.
Give me $40,000.
Yeah, and we have $5,000 budget. Sure.
Right. Yeah. Well, the most common request we hear is we want something just like Angry Birds. So I guess or Candy Crush or something. Yeah. And I think that part of what we would share and ask people to think about a little bit is that there are a lot of different types of gamification strategies. It's not just one flavor. And the strategy that you select really needs to be one that is based around the demographics of the audience, the learning objectives, and the nature of the content. And typically we'll suggest that the gamification strategies or learning games that would be employed as part of a blended learning program, let's say for training that's primarily knowledge-based, they need to be different than training that is primarily skill-based. So part of what we do is to brainstorm some of those notions with the organizations that we work with so that they're selecting the right strategy. That can really help align the cost more effectively without, without really negatively impacting the potential results of the training and its effectiveness and the feedback that folks give on the experience. So it's I think one of the things that we try to do is not overcomplicate it, but there is more to think about than just saying, let's make this one like Angry Birds and that one like Jeopardy and things along those lines. We try and bring a little bit more of our learning and development expertise to it and really help clients understand what the strategies are. We help them identify where the low-hanging fruit could be, because not every learning initiative should be gamified. I think the last thing that we suggest to organizations is really think about a crawl, walk, run strategy. Start small. Start with something that's very finite, can be rolled out very quickly, and is not that expensive, and then assess the results, not only in terms of how that portion of the workforce responds to it, but how effectively it builds the knowledge and skills that the folks will need to be able to perform more effectively back on their job. But it's really about not thinking of this as this big, humongous strategy to start, but let's do a crawl phase, and then once we get feedback from that, we'll take our learning there and start to walk, and then eventually, we'll be at the run phase for this as one of the tools in our bag.
Kirsten, any questions in the chat room yet?
Not in the chat room yet, but I do have another question. Do you know, there's been, a lot of interest in this, a lot of study around it. Do you know if there are studies out right now that show that employees actually become self-connecting and self-motivating in their education in the right gamified environment, so that people who normally wouldn't sign up for L&D activities might be more likely to do that if they feel like it's geared towards them or more entertaining?
Yes, there's actually a very rapidly expanding body of research around that now. One of the folks that we interface with a lot over the last year and a half, 2 years, is Dr. Carl Kopp. And he's written books on gamification, things along those lines. He's done research. We've actually done research ourselves, but there are some other really good research reports that are out there around measuring the ability of gamified learning to attract people more effectively to the learning, better engage them in the learning, and then actually benchmark the learning impact compared to more traditional forms of learning, particularly online. And I know that in the in the footer and so forth, it has our website. There's actually a white paper that we worked on with someone I've known in the industry for quite a long time, Dr. Rob Fauché. And he wrote a white paper for us about, some of the learning science behind what makes learning games effective in the corporate learning space. So that might be a good place to start, would be just to go to our website and download that white paper, and that'll give some great background. But there's a lot more research than that. And we'll certainly be glad to help connect people to that if they're interested in learning more about, the experience of other people and the results and things along those lines.
And we're showing you a website right now, and it is www.gameonlearning.com.
Right. And the resources tab there that you happen to see on the screen is the one that has access to, articles and the white papers and other things as well. So we've really tried to build the website experience, not so much around, selling things to clients, but more educating the learning and development community about, why it's worth considering gamification and some of the supporting research behind those recommendations.
Rick mentioned generational gaps in learning earlier. If there's a push in a company to go towards a more mobile delivery system, is something that appears to be more of a game or is a gamified structure, is that more likely to get people who are resistant to mobile to use it?
Definitely. I think there's 100% probability that would be the case. I love the potential of mobile learning, and I think it's going to continue to grow at a very, very rapid rate within corporate L&D over the next very few years. The concern that I have as I listen to a lot of organizations share what they're doing with mobile learning and present at conferences what they're doing with mobile learning, et cetera, is that they're basically taking what they developed with medium to lower level e-learning, we don't have that much time, we don't have much budget, so let's just get the best we can done and push it out there. And they're really just extending that to mobile devices. And again, I think the advantage of doing that only is that you are making the learning available to the learner via a device they're very likely to have within arm's reach, but you're not necessarily going to do anything to improve the engagement level. So you're increasing the availability, which is good, but not necessarily the potential for engagement. So we tend to suggest that as long as we're going to go mobile, let's use that opportunity to raise the bar by including the ability to incorporate short games into the mobile learning. Just as we talked about before, it will create a more memorable context. It is more engaging. It appeals to people's competitive aspects. So we help organizations implement mobile learning through a platform that we distribute called mLevel. And what's rather remarkable about it is that it allows mobile learning activities to be created and deployed in like 1 to 3 days, which is just crazy. But they're very, very highly interactive. It's very visual. And the response that we get from those sorts of things is great because people can say, now this is actually different. And it actually creates almost like a demand where other people say, well, wait a minute, they got that. I went in on some of that. And particularly for parts of organizations that are very geographically dispersed, sales forces, service representatives, things along those lines, it's very remarkable because they can actually access it in the field. If they only have 10 minutes before a meeting with a customer, they can actually go into, the Knowledge Navigator and do a little bit of last minute prep before the call. But it's for us, we think it's important. Don't just go mobile, but use the opportunity to make mobile a different experience than what we have from the desktops, laptops, and so forth that we leverage now.
Now, can you talk a little bit? You mentioned mLevel. Is that a product that or a platform that you use or sell?
It is. It's actually for those that are more interested in developing their own content and deploying it mobily, mLevel is a platform that we license, and we trained the organization on how to use the cloud-based content development aspect of it. That's called M-Level Studio. And using that tool, they can kind of step through the creation of what's called a mission. And a mission would consist of several learning activities, some of which are gamified. And there are currently about 10 different types of learning activities that are available. And the reason that training can be developed and deployed on this so quickly is because the games themselves are already designed. They're templates, kind of like an empty crucible. And we train the clients on how to take their own content and very quickly format it so it can be loaded into that crucible. And that's why usually between, 1 and 3 days from when a need is identified, it can actually be deployed in the organization to those who need it.
That's great.
What kind of games?
They're very short games. They typically last 2 to 5 minutes in length. And there are different games that are designed specifically for different types of training. For example, there are a couple of the game templates that are suited for asking people to anchor their knowledge around certain facts or knowledge, and the game takes them through a scenario where they play, but they're also presented certain questions where there's a right answer or wrong answer. They've got to select the right answer or they don't score as many points. There are other ones that are more focused around multiple choice questions. There are others that are more focused around sequencing activities and things along those lines. So part of what we do is educate the folks that license the platform as to the instructional purpose of each of the game templates so that they can select the right ones and sequence them to produce the most effective mission.
So does your company also work with companies on their own internal development and design work?
We do. They're really, again, not to make this a commercial for Game On Learning, but we really focus in 3 areas. We have a consultation practice where we help companies figure out where to start. That's usually their biggest question. We know we need to try, learning games. We know we need to try mobile learning. We're not exactly sure where to start or what the right fit or what the right strategies are. We've talked a little bit about the platform that we offer for game-based mobile learning. And the third thing that we do is we work with clients to develop learning games or simulations really from the ground up. And, we bring in whatever they don't have. So if they've got great instructional design folks, they may not have game design folks. So we bring in the resources that are necessary to kind of create a fully functional team to, create a learning game. And we're doing some really very, very cool things with some organizations that are getting into this. And it's amazing. We're helping organizations change their culture. We're helping them change their market position. We're helping sales folks become more effective. Doing some great things in the leadership space, et cetera. So we don't think games are the solution for everything, and we usually recommend that they be surrounded by other things. We love the idea of a blended approach. It's terrific to be able to have people go through a game experience and then have either a virtual or face-to-face instructor facilitated experience to make sure they get it and build a bridge of relevancy between what they learned in the game and what they're expected to do back on the job. So that's part of what is really fun for us, is not just talking about games, but really helping organizations figure out the right way to leverage them within a key learning initiative or things along those lines. So it's a blast. We're having a great time.
Well, that's great. And we are right at the end of our time today. Brian, we'd love to have you back on, and I have a recommendation. Maybe you could do some screenshots, or not screenshot, but a screen recording of you doing some of these things and share and show some of that as we go. That'd be kind of fun.
Love to.
Because with Skype, you never know if it's going to come back. So, and we can run video. Send me the video ahead of time, and we can run them as you're talking. So that'll be fun too.
Let's do that. Let's do that. We, I know we played around a little bit with screen share and so forth, but I'd love to do that. We can have it all teed up, and we'd love to come back whenever you'd like to have us. Thank you.
That sounds great. Well, appreciate your time today. And Kirsten, as always, I'll see you in a little bit. And thanks for subbing today. That was really, really kind of you. And for all you guys in the chat room, you guys were quiet today. We're disappointed. And for all you people watching the recording, please give us your feedback. Let us know how things are going. And we look forward to seeing you again. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks, Kirsten.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.